I'm going to get started here. I know it's the last session of the conference. I know you guys are ready to break into the kegs back there. My name is JP Cortez, and I'm the Policy Director for the Sound Money Defense League. First of all, I'd like to say thank you to StockPulse, to Jen, to Rob, to Gina for putting together an incredible event. The last 2 days have been really incredible, so much information, and it's been a real delight to be here and to be a part of this. The title of my talk, as you guys can see, is Grassroots Power, How Citizens and States Are Restoring Sound Money. But before we get to that, I'd like to talk a little bit about money first. I'll try my best not to drone on too much. I know it's late. I know you guys have been here for a while. And money can be a dull topic. But it's also one of the most misunderstood topics of our time. And we're seeing the implications of that play out every single day. Human beings have always participated or been incentivized to participate in exchange. If humans couldn't trade or weren't able to trade, many of us would promptly die, be it from starvation or by the elements or a number of other things. This isn't a world that many of us would want to live in. The survivors that remain would be living with an incredibly low standard of living. And that means that human trade and exchange is vital. It's a necessary part of human flourishing. So as I'm sure most of you know, before money, there was barter or direct exchange. These are words used to describe a system where each good is priced against every other good. So a small island economy could function like this, for example, a couple of coconuts for some fishing line. The problem is that barter suffers from two major shortcomings. The first is indivisibility, and the second is lack of coincidence of wants. So imagine a scenario with me. Imagine that a farmer wants to buy a pair of boots. So he visits the town cobbler, and he tries to trade a dozen eggs for a pair of boots. But what if the cobbler doesn't want eggs? The cobbler might be willing to accept beef in exchange for the boots, but the farmer doesn't want to have to slaughter his cow for a pair of boots. A trade where all actors in the trade are happy becomes extremely difficult. And it's really easy to see how unmanageable this becomes as populations grow and as needs and wants expand. It's virtually impossible to plan an advanced economy using only direct exchange. Humanity had to adapt, and they did that through indirect exchange. So consider our farmer again. Instead of offering eggs for the boots, what the farmer realizes is that what the cobbler really wants is butter. So he goes out and he trades to acquire butter, and he presents it to the cobbler, and he gets his boots. If enough other people want butter as well, the farmer might be willing to go out and trade for more of that. Not because the farmer has any direct use for butter, but rather because other people are willing to accept it in exchange for goods and services. That process is called indirect exchange. Many goods have played this role in the past. Tobacco in colonial Virginia, in the West Indies, they used sugar. There was wampum fruit, there were small shells, copper in ancient Egypt as well. Historically, gold and silver have emerged as a sound money because it was selected by the market, not only because gold or silver can be cut in half and boiled down into small transportable units. There's also the practical use of the metals, any sort of industrial uses. There's beauty. There's scarcity, of course. And so gold and silver have a lot of other qualities that would make it a good money as well. They are fungible. You know, as I'm sure most of you know, if you were to take an ounce of silver and cut it in half, each half would be worth the same amount as if brought back together. And if you wanted to, you could melt these down and recreate your coin. You can compare this to, example, a diamond that you could argue has some properties of a store of value, but each diamond itself is unique. And if you were to cut a diamond in half, the value of each half wouldn't add up to the whole diamond. This process, the cumulative development of a medium of exchange on the free market, that's how the market chooses the most reliable form of money, the soundest money, and how eventually that caused market economies to move away from barter. So now we know what money is, but money in and of itself, isn't the ultimate goal, because money can be either sound or unsound. Sound money, simply defined, would be money that retains its purchasing power over time, while subject to those market forces. The framers of the United States Constitution knew the importance of sound money, and that's why they codified it. Article 1, Section 10 of the United States Constitution says that no state shall emit bills of credit. At the time, emitting bills of credit meant printing unbacked paper notes. It continues, or make anything but gold and silver coin a tender in the payment of debts. So sound money has two pretty simple value propositions. The first is the stability that comes with sound money. People are able to accumulate savings and better plan for the future, better plan for saving and investing, to plan and to build out the infrastructure of the towns and the communities in which they live, to raise the standard of living of that community. All of these things are made possible. And in fact, sound money is a necessary part of these things because you need that stability to be able to make investments planning for the future, 30 years in the future, 50 years in the future, 100 years in the future. The second value proposition of sound money is that it acts as a defense against big government. This current system of debt-fueled fiat money has fueled a government, has empowered a government, has enabled a government to spend recklessly in ways that it otherwise could not. It allows the costs of this inflation to be socialized across all of the currency holders. From decade-long wars to wasteful domestic programs, the ability to print money endlessly has empowered a government to do all of these things in a way that it would not be able to do without access to a monetary printing press. So from America's inception, gold and silver have played a crucial role in the monetary system that the framers intended to create. And we can all see why the signatories to the Constitution found it to be so important. Ludwig von Mises, notable Austrian economist, wrote in 1912, he wrote, "The classical or orthodox gold standard alone is truly an effective check on the power of government to inflate the currency. Without such a check, all other constitutional safeguards are rendered vain." That was in 1912. That was 1 year before the Federal Reserve was established and the unconstitutional income tax was passed. 5 years before the US entered the First World War. 21 years before FDR made gold ownership illegal through executive order. 29 years till the Second World War, and then 59 years before Nixon closed the gold window, severing any tie to any real standard and the US dollar. Along with the country's founders, Mises realized was prescient about understanding that a government cannot be trusted with a monopoly on money. Americans no longer carry gold and silver the way our grandparents did in our pockets or in our purses, but we do still carry the spirit and the legacy of these metals through our language. Sound money embodies a really clear message, recognized across centuries, across millennia, around the world. It describes the musical, metallic ring of a gold or silver coin dropped on a hard surface. Anyone here who has ever held metals in their hands knows what I'm talking about. It's a regal feeling. It's an honest feeling of metals in your hand. Sound money literally refers to real wealth, the natural, unmistakable signature of authenticity, as opposed to the paper, the plastic, the electronic debt instruments we use almost exclusively today. The term sound money has its roots in ancient Rome. Back then, it was very commonplace to use silver coins in exchange, whether you're paying soldiers or buying goods from all corners of the known world. But as Rome squandered its wealth, it had to find a way to shore up its treasury. So gradually, it debased the coinage down to, at one point, 5% purity. This didn't fool anyone for long. It's very understandable. You can see how soldiers who were risking their lives, in many cases dying on these bloody battlefields, don't want to come home to be paid in worthless mystery metal. Since then, there really have been no shortages of attempts and examples of a government to debase its own currency, and unfortunately, the US is no exception. Less than 100 years into the American experiment, the Civil War began. Wars are expensive, and the federal government at the time had a policy of printing notes with equal gold or silver held in a vault. And unfortunately, the government was running low on specie. Lincoln and his money managers knew this wasn't going to go over well. After all, the Constitutional Convention took place only 75 years before the Civil War. James Madison at the time wrote that paper money was wicked. Thomas Jefferson wrote that it was unjust, it was unconstitutional. So the framers knew good and well about the potential damages of paper money. And even though it was unconstitutional, Lincoln and his team of money managers printed and issued greenbacks, unbacked paper money. But how can you get people to accept paper money in exchange for goods and services? It doesn't make sense. What incentive would people have to accept paper? The answer was legal tender. You see, legal tender is this very esoteric, abstract concept where the government waves its magical wand and suddenly strips of paper have monetary properties that they didn't have before. It's a stamp of approval where people are forced to accept this paper money, if begrudgingly at first. And it's worth noting that they wanted us to participate in these paper notes, and we were allowed to exchange goods and services for these notes. But if you were paying a customs duty, if you were paying taxes, no, the government wanted the real stuff. You couldn't use the paper to pay the government. By the end of the war, more than 500,000 notes had been issued. And what happens next should surprise no one. As always happens with unbacked paper money, the greenbacks lost an overwhelming majority of their purchasing power. How about that? A surprise, right? The next 150 years were entirely predictable. The establishment of the Federal Reserve System, which has lost 97% of the value of the Federal Reserve note since its inception, despite having a mandate to maintain price stability, an unconstitutional income tax, the literal seizure and making illegal of private ownership of gold in the United States through executive order, and the abrogation of gold clause contracts. So an explosion of government spending leads us to where we are today, which is upwards of $30 trillion in debt. Is that right? So after several millennia of being tested by the market, it's clear that gold and silver are indeed sound money. There's no question. It's also true that it's possible for new sound monies to emerge. But what we know for sure is that no government can escape the consequences of removing sound money from its monetary system. This means that the process through which money is created is actually not one of creation at all. It's one of discovery through the market, not through creation by central planners. And it behooves us to learn this and to realize this and change this before it's too late. So that brings us to the Sound Money Defense League, the organization that I am the policy director for. We were established in 2015 with support from Money Metals Exchange, one of the largest precious metals dealers and depositories in the US. And our project is twofold. The first tenet of what we do here is largely policy. There are countless current laws all over the United States that harass and unfairly target supporters of sound money. So the Sound Money Defense League works to draft legislation, to introduce and pass legislation, to eliminate taxes on the purchase and sale of gold and silver, sales tax and income tax, to bolster state funds using physical gold and silver held in state reserves, to establish in-state depositories so that the state has a place to store its gold outside of the clutches of the federal systems. There's so much friction into and out of the dollar, and that's not an accident. Legal tender laws and regulations and these taxes serve to keep us in the dollar. That's entirely the point. There's so much friction, and that's why it would be impossible today to adopt your own gold standard. If you were to use gold, if you were to try to transact in gold, you would have to keep your cost basis for every single transaction. Every single transaction would be a taxable event. It's unfeasible to use gold and silver today as money. And so the policy issue is a big part of what we do at the Sound Money Defense League, but as important is the education. There's a massive disconnect. What we've learned here is that there is a massive glaring disconnect between what people think the printing of money does and what it actually does. People think that the printing of money goes to help poor people or to fund unfunded or underfunded institutions. But the reality of what money printing is, you can see it today. I don't have to tell you, we're living it right now. Devastating inflation at a time where people were already struggling to afford basic necessities. It's not an act of God. You can't force majeure clause your way out of this. This was a policy, an intentional policy of devaluing, sucking the life, the purchasing power out of your dollar. And that's not happening on accident. It's a policy choice. What printing money actually does, creating that devastating inflation, worsening wealth inequality through Kientzian effects, and encouraging and empowering a government to spend recklessly. I don't mean to pick on a legislator, but I have a true story that I swear I promise it's true. I'm not making this up. Maryland has had a long-standing exemption on precious metals in their state. When you go into a precious metals dealer in Maryland to buy an ounce of gold or an ounce of silver, there is no sales tax. They passed a law a while ago eliminating that sales tax. Unfortunately, a group of tax revenue-hungry politicians have spent the last couple of years trying to pass measures to eliminate the sales tax exemption that currently exists on precious metals. And so the Sound Money Defense League activated, and we diverted a lot of our bandwidth to this project in Maryland. And I went out there and I took a meeting with a legislator that was on the committee. And we sit down and we're 15 minutes into this conversation about gold and silver when she stops me and says, "Excuse me, Mr. Cortez, I don't think I understand. What do gold and silver have to do with chicken soup?" And I said, "I'm sorry, I don't understand. What do you mean?" And she said, "Well, you said we'd be talking about bullion, and that's what you guys use, that's what this chicken stock, right? The base." And I don't mean to pick on this legislator, I really don't. Because the reality is, there are more than 7,000 elected legislators across the US, most of which have never heard the term sound money, have never given any thought to what money is or where it derives its value. And so having this direct contact with legislators has been incredibly educational. These people that are ostensibly making decisions and writing the laws that govern our lives with no real concept for what money is, what a store of value is, what sound money is. And on top of that, direct contact with legislators is great, but it's the grassroots ultimately that makes any of this possible. Speaking to people in the state and having them contact their legislators, emails, phone calls, showing up to testify, letting legislators know that this is not some niche issue. There are people in this state that actually care about this issue. So when the Sound Money Defense League goes to any given state, we offer a variety of different levels of support, types of support. So we actually draft legislation in many cases, like I mentioned earlier. We work to find co-sponsors for the sponsor that chooses to champion our bill in their state. We develop talking points so that the sponsor doesn't even have to work all that hard. Explanations, the meaning behind all of this, the constitutional ramifications of all of this. One of us, someone on the Sound Money Defense League, regularly travels to these state capitals to testify before these committees, to let these committees know about the wrong-headed or the boneheaded issues that they're either trying to pass or trying to do away with. On top of that, there's also the media, going to local publications, going to local papers and news stations and radio stations to get the word out about these issues, about key votes, about hearings coming up, about all of the things that the people in the state would want to or need to know to protect sound money in their state. One of our biggest issues, one of the fights that we fight most often, is the sales tax issue. When we started, I believe there were 33 states, or rather, there were 17 states in the country that still charge sales tax on precious metals. So when you go into a store, you buy an Eagle, you're hit with 7, 8, 9% on top of any premium or anything else that you already paid. Today, there are 42 states that have eliminated that tax. We've been working across almost 10 states to pass legislation specifically like this, and the reasons are abundant. You know, taxing the only form of money in the US Constitution is wrong. If you walk into a gas station today and exchange 4 quarters for $1, it's a non-taxable event because you're simply exchanging one form of money for another. But that's exactly what you're doing when you go to your bullion dealer and you exchange $20 for a silver eagle. It's the same thing. On top of that, sales taxes, it's an inappropriate application of sales taxes. Sales taxes are use taxes. You're consuming them. The way when you eat a hamburger or you buy a t-shirt, you're using and consuming these goods. Gold and silver are not that. They're assets held for resale. So a sales tax is entirely inappropriate. And these are the arguments that we make to legislators when we go and fight these fights. Another big issue we have is the capital gains issue. Across most of the states here in the United States, when you sell your precious metals, if you experience a gain, the state is going to charge you capital gains on that. And here's the kicker. So in a couple of states then, there are states where you're taxed when you purchase the metal. When you sell the metal, if you have a gain, the state is going to tax you again, and then the feds are going to tax you again. You're being taxed 3 times on the same dollar. So going through, on top of all of that, is the reality of the inflationary process here. So when I buy gold at $1,800 an ounce, and the next day it sells for $1,850, the value of the gold did not change. The units that the gold is being priced in is dying. The dollar is dying, so it takes more individual units to buy the same ounce of gold. So these taxes that are levied against you on supposed gains are not actually gains. It's a phantom gain. It's not a real gain, it's a nominal gain wrought by inflation. And so between the capital gains and the sales tax issue, those are the 2 biggest taxation issues we do, but it's not just that, right? There are states that have introduced and passed legislation reaffirming that gold and silver are indeed money, precluding it from any sort of taxation that might come after. There are states that have introduced legislation to enforce gold clause contracts. These were common 50, 100 years ago, where people would make long-term contracts and expect payment in their designated medium of exchange, which is specie. If you did that today, a court would come to you and say, you can get the dollar amount for the gold that was promised in the contract. So specific performance is not enforced. But everyone in this room knows $100,000 in dollar bills and $100,000 worth of gold, they are not the same thing. Similarly, we're also working with Treasurer's Office, Treasurer's offices. In many cases, there's a list of permissible investments that state treasurers are allowed to invest in. Surprise, gold and silver, more times than not, in fact, never, are on that list. Whereas you have third world debt, emerging market debt, you have poorly performing stocks, bonds, ETFs with, in many cases, especially today, negative real rates of return. But most states don't own a single ounce of gold, which is ludicrous. There's also pension funds. There's a massive underfunded pension crisis emerging in this country where money managers are promising 7, 8, 9% year over year. And eventually this is going to come to a head when these investments are seen for what they are. It's paper, it's not real value. Grassroots pressure is the secret sauce that makes all of this work. Every single piece of legislation we've ever passed, every single legislative effort we've ever been a part of would not have been possible, would not have succeeded without grassroots pressure. There's a state senator from Illinois, Everett Dirksen, who once said, "When I feel the heat, that's when I see the light." And it speaks to what American politics is. These people, they don't care about your issue in many cases. They don't know about your issue in many cases. And it takes knocking on doors, it takes sending the emails, it takes making the phone calls for people to realize, oh, this is an issue that matters to the constituents in my state, the people that voted for me. I have sincerely a half a dozen stories that truly show that grassroots pressure carried the day in places like Ohio and Arkansas, Alabama, Virginia. I have gotten several phone calls and emails from legislators that are angry at me. Why are these people calling me to make them stop? And I get these angry phone calls and these angry emails, and that tells me that what we're doing is working. And so we redouble our efforts. If we're bothering you as legislators, good. You need to make them feel the heat so that they can see the light. Your liberty is not going to be defended by anyone else. The feds aren't coming to save you. The federal government doesn't have any answers. Frankly, the state doesn't have any answers either. So our goal, what we do, is simply to get the state to get the hell out of the way. Let people adopt their own gold standards. Let people care for their communities and their loved ones as they see fit. That ultimately is more important than dedicating headspace and time to the jungle that is DC, right? The community theater actors that are running around the halls of Capitol Hill don't know anything about what the people of Spokane, Washington want or need, Bozeman, Montana, Eagle, Idaho. These people have nothing in common. But for some reason, 2,000 miles away, they're passing legislation, enacting regulations that affect all of our lives. If the answer is going to come from any legislation, it's largely going to be state legislation. And it's going to be to empower people to make the decisions and to live the life that they want to live. We've had a ton of success since 2017 of legislators, states, people actively passing legislation, pro-sound money legislation across all of these states here. You know, you guys can read. I don't want to do the reading game, but Alabama, Arizona, Arkansas, Kansas, Louisiana, right? And the list goes on. Sorry? Nice, yeah, see? And so people are actually affected by this, and this is actually change that is affecting millions of precious metals investors, savers, dealers around the country. It's not always just us passing bills to eliminate taxes, though. Like I mentioned earlier, sometimes these tax revenue-hungry politicians see something like a sales tax exemption on gold and silver and say to themselves, no, I want that money. The state is losing money on this exemption, and we want it. And so, I'm sad to say, Washington is one of those states where I seemingly have to come back every year to the state capitol to explain to these people why taxing gold and silver, the purchase of gold and silver with a sales tax, is completely inappropriate. It's asinine. There are other states as well that have tried to pass legislation, and these are defensive victories. We're going out, we're mobilizing the grassroots, and we're stopping this legislation. We're stopping these repeals. These are states that have considered legislation, states where we might not necessarily have gotten it past the finish line yet, but we're well on our way. That's Hawaii on the sales tax issue, Maine on the sales tax issue. So of the 8 states that still remain that charge sales tax on precious metals, we've got active legislation in 5 of them. hoping to pass more this year. So the Sound Money Index is a project of which I'm the lead author. We publish it every year. This is it right here. And it's an index. It's a guidebook that ranks all 50 states using 12 different criteria to determine which states offer the best and the worst environment for sound money. These are issues such as taxation. These are issues whether or not the state has reaffirmed gold and silver as money, in-state depositories, issuing gold bonds, dealer harassment laws. There are laws in several states, for example, in Arizona, where you're not allowed to use cash to buy precious metals. Or the dealer has to come to you, or rather, if you go into a store and try to purchase precious metals from a dealer, that dealer has to take down all your information. They're going to take down your hair, your weight, your skin color, your eye color, any tattoos, any notable features. And then every day they have an obligation to upload this to a police database. Who knows what the police are doing with it? But there are these laws that exist all over the country that harass precious metals dealers and investors. The index shows the results that came out this year. Wyoming is still at the top. Wyoming has done an incredible job of passing legislation to remove sales tax, remove capital gains tax. They've tried to establish a depository. They have precluded gold and silver from any future taxes that may arise. Texas notably has their depository they may have heard of. They were recently, or rather formally invested in their teacher pension fund, $100 million worth of gold. Ohio as well has also invested about $100 million. I believe it's in their firefighter pension fund. So more states are opening up to the idea of protecting their state assets with gold and silver. Of course, you've got your New Jerseys, your Vermonts, your Maines, that despite trying in these states, these are by far still the worst states on this issue. There's a depiction of the index. The lighter states are going to be the states that are better on these issues, whereas the darker states are the trouble states. So what's next? This will be our 7th year, our 7th legislative session. What's next? First has to be sales tax. This is the easiest one. States shouldn't be charging sales tax, and it's these 8 states that remain. Another thing for a state that has already passed the removal of taxes to consider would be passing legislation to allow the state itself to invest in gold and silver. Many states, most states, actually maybe all states, are not allowed. It's codified. You're not allowed to invest in gold and silver. So explicitly giving the state treasurer the power to do this, whether it does it, whether the state treasurer chooses to do it or not, having the power to do it explicitly would be a big next step. And then lastly would be to create a mechanism through which states and citizens can remit and accept and submit taxation, tax payments with the government. The reality is that the dollar is dying, and one day it will die. And so to have mechanisms and the infrastructure in place to allow a state to continue transacting, it would be massive in the case of calamity. So I'll close with this. History is wrought with these economic distortions. There's no shortage of governments debasing their currency throughout history. Appreciation for gold and silver have largely, entirely been zapped out of the public consciousness. Today, there's little to no understanding about what money is, and where it derives its value, and what we're left with is the folly of politicians and financial experts. They've replaced a tried and true gold standard with a PhD standard. I personally would rather be a gold bug, though, than a Fed bug, because there's more to sound money than what we're talking about here. It's very easy to get wonky or wrapped up in the policy, but the reality is that sound money, honest weights and measures, are crucial to a prosperous society grounded in honesty and liberty and stability. Our hearts, your heart, my heart, they all yearn naturally for liberty. But it must do more than just lie there. Thank you very much. Does anyone have any questions, or was? Yeah.
You said the states that don't have sales tax, you listed them up. I actually live in Nevada, and I know when I buy precious metals from a dealer, there is some sort of tax. So when I buy it online, I have it shipped to Missouri. What is it not sales? What is the tax in Nevada then?
There is a really strange, it is a sales tax. There's a really strange wrinkle on, I believe it's bars. There are specific items that.
Coins, it's, sovereign mint coins, American Eagles,
Yeah.
harmonics, any of those. There is a tax in the local shop, or if I buy them online.
Mm-hmm.
So when I buy them online, I have them shipped to
Out of state, yeah. Yeah, the state law, the regulation that governs that in Nevada includes coins, tokens, stamps, and all of these other things. So the Nevada statute is particularly complicated in a way that most others aren't. I know that there's a wrinkle on some things that are and are not taxed in Nevada. Other than that, I'd continue shipping out of.
It's not a sales tax.
I don't think it is. It falls under something else. But yeah.
Oh,
no, yeah.
I was trying to understand what tax they're trying to charge me. I don't even bother because I just have it shipped somewhere else.
Yeah.
I don't deal with it.
Which is the best way to do it, right? If you're in one of these states, you have it shipped to somewhere else, or you have it stored in a depository. Yeah.
The article in the Constitution, it specifies the weight of the currency, gold and silver, both. It also stipulates, I believe, the government shall not carry any debt somewhere in there.
Ooh.
Now think about that, because that's debasement if they carry the debt.
Mm-hmm.
If I recall, and I'm just a little foggy on the issue, but I'm wondering if you recall.
I'm less sure about any constitutional statute or anything in the Constitution that specifically mentions the carrying of debt. What I have found interesting, what I've been thinking a little bit about, what I have found interesting lately is, and sorry, you sprung me somewhere else, is the takings clause in the Constitution. The Fifth Amendment says that the government can't take your stuff without compensating you. But inflation is largely the taking of our purchasing power. So for all of the other reasons that inflation or paper money might be unconstitutional, the Fifth Amendment and the takings clause is maybe chief among them. So sorry, I know that didn't answer your question, but you had me constitutional running off. Anyone else? Yeah. Cool. I guess that's it then. Thank you guys so much for being here. Let's go drink some beer. Yeah?